Hello, WVLP listeners. This is Kealah Parkinson, and you are listening to Tune In, radio for your mind, body, and soul. Welcome, and thank you for joining me today as we talk a little bit about mindfulness and what it means to be mindful in our community, and especially how to bring consciousness to our world. Joining me again today is Mr. Stephen Dynako. Hello, Stephen.
Hey, Kealah. Deja vu, I'm back.
Deja vu. We just got to talk last week. Thank you to Greg Kovach, our station manager, who's doubling as a babysitter today, which is really, really cool. He's a jack of all trades. And I brought a little guest with me today, a little short guest, and he's not going to be on the air, but he is part of my conscious evolution. And so conscious evolution, there I just gave the term away. This is every week I like to talk about a book as well as the subject we're talking about. The subject today is the legacy of Ms. Barbara Marx Hubbard, and specifically how Stephen Dynako is bringing that to Valparaiso, Indiana. So that's something I'm really excited about, to learn more about Barbara and her work. And she just passed away this past spring. And were you around her at all at the end?
Yeah, so she did her very last program in class. I mean, we all met online, right? So when I say her last class, it was called the Evolutionary Ambassador Academy.
Okay.
And literally people from all over the world were on this. So we met online on the Zoom video conference platform. So her very last appearance as a teacher was during the academy.
Okay.
So we were 8 weeks into a 12-week program. On Thursday, April 4th. She actually did the program from the hospital.
Wow.
Which you wouldn't have known anything was wrong because other than the backdrop of her being in a hospital bed, she was just like completely focused and it really facilitated this session perfectly. And then that weekend is when she fell into a coma, and then the week following made her transition. But I feel so honored that I got to work so closely with her in co-creating that program.
And she took her consciousness like right through the end of her
life.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. She, absolutely really walked her talk, did her work all the way through to the end. Yeah.
So amazing. So if anybody is not familiar with Barbara Marx Hubbard, first of all, you can jump onto our Facebook page. It's Facebook. Excuse me. It would be facebook.com/TuneInMindfulRadio. So facebook.com/TuneInMindfulRadio, and you can find our page, or you can just Google Tune In Mindful Radio, and you can be directed to our Facebook page. And we have a link there, and here's an even easier way to access it. Go to BarbaraMarxHubbard.com. So Marx would be MARX, and that was the name she was born with, and then married, and also added the name Hubbard. And you can learn a lot about her worldview. You can learn a lot about her life history. You can find that on Wikipedia as well. Stephen, can you give us just a brief, as brief as you'd like, or as long as you'd like, overview of Barbara Marx Hubbard and a little bit about her biography?
Yeah, sure. I'll preface all this by saying I had a quantum friendship with her. I mean, there are people who worked with her for decades. I'm not one of them.
Okay.
My work with her was within like literally the last year or so.
Okay.
And, so I got to, I had to do a deep dive myself, an immersion into just learning more about her. I knew of her since about 2015, which is the first time I met her. At an event, but really working with her over the past year, I immersed myself in her story. And her father, Louis Marx, was the founder of Marx Toys, which is a very hugely successful toy company, and so she came from a world of affluence. But struggled with what's my purpose in the world? That's really what it comes down to. I mean, she would call it the evolutionary impulse. And she was, when she was young, wanting to get in tune with what is my purpose on earth. Why am I here? And it was really profound for her in World War II when we dropped the atomic bombs on Japan. And then she immediately had this like existential crisis. And now because of her affluence, her father knew Eisenhower. So when she's 22, she goes to visit President Eisenhower in the Oval Office. And this is in the wake of, it is very fresh in our minds, the end of World War II. And I think a lot of people probably were getting back to quote unquote normal in society. But Barbara's, this question's lingering about like the power that we've created. Like humans have created this power to destroy to such a great extent.
On such a level.
Right? So she goes into President Eisenhower and asks, may I ask you a question, Mr. President? He goes, yeah, sure. And she says, well, what is the meaning of our newfound technological power that is good? And he says, I don't know. And that's what started her on her quest to answer that question. Because that event, that war, what we were able to achieve, she realized that humanity has the power to use our technology for absolute good, or we can use it for absolute evil, if you will, and we can destroy ourselves just as easily as we can save ourselves. So she spent the remainder of her life answering that question, and helping to bring others to a conscious place where they can consider what does it mean? Like, because here we are, there's no other species that we know of, I mean, at least here on Earth, that has this power to create something to transform our lives in such significant ways.
And to consciously do it. So let's just talk about that little piece of it, right? I mean, because I don't know if there was an existential crisis and the people who worked on the bombs, right? I have read a little bit about that. Some yes did, and some yes then did go on to try and maybe kind of make some sort of amends for that in some ways, right? But for the most part, I'm guessing that a lot of the people working on those projects and programs were kind of just putting one foot in front of the other, doing the next thing, sort of behaving reactively, the way that we all can do commonly throughout our lives, right? Okay, get up in the morning, what's on the agenda? How do I do this? How do I handle that the dog spilled the coffee, right? And just going from thing to thing to thing. That is existing, right? And the concept of bringing consciousness to it, can you describe a little bit about that and what that looks like in comparison on either Barbara's level or on our day-to-day level here in Valpo?
Right. So basically, conscious evolution is all about that we as Homo sapiens, the species, we actually have a conscious choice in everything. And it's just this, and we've heard these sayings before, like, not letting life happen to you. And I know it often can feel like that's exactly what happens, is life happens to us. Now on a grander scale, about how we exercise our power and all this innovative capacity and these brilliant minds we have, conscious evolution is about the choice that we make to use that intelligence, that power, that innovation, rather than have it happen to us. And
you made, I'm assuming, some conscious choices, right? I know with your work, you're very conscious about that. You're conscious about bringing Barbara's legacy. So maybe let's go to your personal story of when you first were impacted and you started, we've heard a little bit about Barbara's story and how she was affected by the bomb and how she was such a visionary, right? She was looking very long-term at this. Like, what are the long-term ramifications of this for all of humanity, right? And so what was Stephen's moment of kind of questioning, what is my role and how do I help? And then also, when did you start to make that change? Was it a vast, rapid change, or was it in increments?
Yeah, sure. For me, it was, actually it was probably around the time that I met Barbara when things really clicked for me. So the really short version of a very long story is, I grew up in Chicago. In and around Chicago, pretty much, the typical American family life. And, going to school, pretty middle class, expectation that I'll go to school and then, you're definitely going to college. And, all the money you get in your cards for Christmas goes to your college fund, that kind of thing. So it was pretty much ingrained in me. This is the path that I'm expected to take. And then after, go to school, get the degree, get the job, do that thing for however many years I do that, then you retire and you play golf or something.
Okay.
I mean, that's sort of like what was,
And you were pretty far on that path, right? When you had your awakening.
Yeah. Well, so and I want to also say, because this is important, because this speaks to the evolutionary impulse, which is a term that Barbara used, like our own seeking for greater purpose. When I was very young, I had a sense of my own spiritual connectedness. And I remember there are a couple of distinct times where I had a curiosity about my spirituality. I didn't have a whole lot of space to process that in, so it sort of fell dormant for a long time as I got socialized into our modern Western world, right? So just I want to park that because it's important. So in any case, I go through my life, go to school, go to college, graduate, get the corporate job. Working in corporate America, pretty typical, kind of climbing the ladder stuff. And I was an entrepreneur for a little while in there too. And then after 9/11 happened, as a small business owner, a lot of my business just dried up. And I had to kind of reinvent myself and went back into the corporate world. And one thing that happened when I did that is I realized there was a lot of skills I had acquired in my previous vocational world that I was going to draw upon that I didn't think I ever would use again, such as technology and graphic design, that kind of thing. I went into the banking industry is what happened.
The first time, like originally out of college?
No, so okay. my original love was communications and the media.
That's right.
Right. So
That's right. We share that.
Communications and the media was my first, the first industry I was in. And then when I went to work for myself, more technology, multimedia. And then after 9/11 happened, reinvented myself. And actually the banking industry was very trusted at that time, believe it or not.
Right.
And they were hiring. So I just rebuilt my career from the ground up in the banking industry. But all of the skills I had gained previously ended up being things I drew upon. So because I knew how to build databases and I knew technology and I actually knew how to run projects.
And banking was just kind of segueing into that, what had been called new media previously, right?
Yeah, right.
I'm very familiar with this era as well.
Yeah. So I drew on all these old skills that I had before. And the other thing that happened was I was getting in touch with a deep-seated desire to want to be helpful to people. Did
that mesh with banking? Did it feel anathema to banking?
Well, what's interesting is that my banking career gave me the opportunity to mentor people. Because at some point I became a manager of a service unit in the private bank sector, and was able to play the role of mentoring the people who reported to me. Because my interest was in helping them to flourish and do their best, and I realized, well, I'm their manager, but they already know how to do their jobs. I don't really functionally need to tell them what to do. Now, I realize not every manager has that philosophy, but I was very much like, these are professional people. Many have been in this job for many, many years. So who am I to tell them how to do their job? I'm there to help them build the confidence and the morale to do it better. That was my approach. So I took a more relational approach to being
very
a manager.
Humanistic.
Yeah. And that sparked my desire to be more helpful to people in general. And it started at the bank, but then it went beyond that. Because at that same time, after 9/11, I actually got connected with the Unity Church. My background was Roman Catholic, which I fell away from in my 20s. I find the Unity Church in my 30s and now get introduced to the concept of like metaphysical Christianity.
And so just define what metaphysical Christianity means.
So basically, well, metaphysics is just basically, it's what the physical is about. It's the thing above the physical, right?
Meta.
So meta, yeah. So essentially, all that means is when you apply it to something like Christianity, and it could be really applied to any spiritual path. It doesn't have to be Christianity, but when you look at the metaphysics of a faith tradition, it's really about the higher order of it. You know, it's not. It doesn't focus on the dogma. It doesn't focus on those kind of lower level rules. It's more about the higher order principle.
So kind of like looking at the themes inherent in the religion, right?
Like
the principle to love humankind concept.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is like what all faith traditions share in common, right?
Exactly.
That love is a power, and love transforms. Right, and that we are all interconnected. We're on one planet. We're not separate. We actually have an inherent connection to our Creator, whatever you want to call that, by whatever name. So that's the practice of metaphysics and spirituality. So I got deeply connected into that, and I love that. Like I immediately felt spiritually at home once I became familiar with that concept, and then my desire to help people blossomed even further.
So I'd like to hear about how did that connect to, when you kind of felt this connection to your own spiritual depths, how did that connect to your vision, with humanity? Did it broaden that at all?
It did, but it was a process.
Okay.
Because so the way when I tell this story to people, I had like 2 feet in 2 different worlds. So I was in the Unity Church. I was actually doing lay chaplaincy. I got attracted to that right away because I could be present to other people in a more sacred way. And so I had a foot in that world.
So mentoring on a very deep level then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And being present to people through crisis and so forth. And then my other foot was firmly planted in the corporate world. Right? So the way I tell the story is I have my feet in these 2 different worlds, but then the worlds start to move apart. So like you can only do the splits for so long, and then you got to jump. You got to make a decision to jump. And yet there was still something deep within me that I realized there's a way to bridge the worlds as well. Right? Because I did jump out of the corporate world, went into to more of a helping. When I was working as a coach, and actually, I went back to school to Loyola, my alma mater, to get a degree in pastoral counseling, a master's degree, and I did a little bit of clinical work for a little time, but that didn't quite feel right either. And then in 2016, I got connected with a program called the Conscious Business Initiative, and it was all about expanding the consciousness of the commercial world, the business world. And then that's when it hit me. I was like, "Oh,
there was your bridge.
This is where I can take." Because at the time I thought it was about like putting all my business experience behind. And what the epiphany that I had was, well, I can take my business background and my skills and merge it with my desire to help people. So I got involved. Really, I made a quantum leap getting involved in the conscious business movement.
You are listening to WVLP LP 103.1 FM in beautiful Valparaiso, Indiana, the Vale of Paradise. This is Tune In, radio for your mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Kealah Parkinson, and Tune In is underwritten in part by Kiki Productions, Inc., a coaching company with a mission to help people all over the world thrive through exercises that help you cycle out of fight or flight in the moment. Speak your truth, grow your world with Kiki Productions, Inc. And we are talking to Stephen Dynako today, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this work, the Conscious Business Enterprise, that he just mentioned, as part of a legacy of his work directly with Barbara Marx Hubbard. So Google Barbara Marx Hubbard if you don't know who we're talking about. fascinating woman who's had a great influence on America. You'll probably be surprised at other ways you've been influenced by her, maybe unconsciously.
Yeah.
But now we're going to talk about the conscious evolution aspect. And I keep mentioning this phrase, conscious evolution. It's one of her many books. I think she's written 7 books, and she's contributed lots of other articles and essays. And Conscious Evolution is a book we're going to feature today. I'll put information about that on our Facebook page. You can find that at Facebook and /TuneIn Mindful Radio, I believe is the page for that. And Stephen, you just mentioned this. You were telling a little bit about your story about how you had the 2 feet in the 2 different worlds, the corporate world of banking, and then finding this personal transformation through your own connection to spirituality that was kind of opening you up to your own consciousness, right? Through like a metaphysical perspective on spirituality. And you mentioned, I want to go back to this point where you mentioned the 2 worlds seem to grow farther apart.
Right.
And you were kind of doing the splits, and you thought you were going to have to leap over from corporate to spiritual, and you found a way to bridge. But I want to go back to that moment where the worlds seemed to be growing apart.
Yeah.
Because in that moment, was it your perspective that they were growing apart because you were noticing differences, or were the worlds really diverging?
Well, I mean, so we'll go back to a concept of Barbara's in explaining that. I basically was in crisis, right? And so
you're noticing the differences.
Right, and every crisis is a birth, as Barbara would say.
Love it.
So for me, the crisis was that the corporate world had no more meaning. Like it did. Like
you had lost your connection to it personally.
Well, I lost a connection to a purpose, and it just seemed like, well, I'm doing these rote tasks that are benefiting maybe a few really high-level executives at the top. I mean, I made good money. I can't complain. But I just didn't feel fulfilled at all. And this is a crisis. It's like, well, I can't keep doing this because I felt dead inside. And this is why I made the leap.
And, just in another connection with Barbara Marx Hubbard, then, she came from a world of affluence. You already mentioned her father was a wealthy person. He was very connected in the business world, and she still had this crisis, right? And
she did.
Again, money doesn't solve everything here.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And Barbara, growing up in that affluent world. And this was a struggle.
In some ways, it's a privilege too, though, right? To have this crisis because we've gotten our basic needs met.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And for sure, because the crisis is the thing then that sparks the evolutionary impulse to seek that deeper meaning, to seek that self-actualization, you might say. Do you,
just to kind of diverge for a second, do you see the same kind of crisis point happen with people who aren't monetarily comfortable? Do you see that happening? Can you give us some examples of places where that has happened?
Well, so this is interesting. So one of Barbara's books is called The Hunger of Eve, which is a biography that she wrote. It came out in the 80s. And she was good friends with Jonas Salk.
Oh, right. The vaccines.
Yeah.
Okay. Polio, right?
Right.
Okay.
The inventor of the polio vaccine. But Jonas Salk was also very much, did a lot of work to support the concept of conscious evolution. Right. So he was much more than just the inventor of the polio vaccine. And he and Barbara had a very strong working relationship. And then the other person was, and this is the one who I meant to say, was Abraham Maslow. So Abraham Maslow was the creator of the
pyramid,
the hierarchy
needs.
of needs, right? And this is what I meant to say. But Abraham Maslow basically says you can have all of your needs met. You can have all of those items on the pyramid. However, when you have all the comfort and when you have all of those basic needs met, if there isn't some sort of direction to self-actualize, actually it can manifest as physical illness.
Interesting.
So this is like this was the thing that Barbara absolutely believed in terms of her own curiosity. I mean, she was 89 and she worked to the very end.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a picture of her in her hospital bed on her laptop that last week. So self-actualization, that's the thing that keeps us holistic, not just healthy, but holistic. So Abraham Maslow is very much about, if we've got all the basic needs met, but we're not on some path to self-actualize, the caveat is we could fall into illness, physical illness.
So I'm putting that on our Facebook page right now, this pyramid of needs, hierarchy of needs from Abraham Maslow. And so you can get a visual if you're listening. Also, if you have questions and you'd like to talk to Stephen and me, you can always call the station at 219-476-9000. Or you can just go ahead and jump on that Facebook page and we'll answer your questions live on air. So I want to let listeners know that as well. I want to remind listeners you are listening to WVLP LP 103.1 FM in beautiful Valparaiso. This is Tune In Radio for your mind, body, and soul. I am your host, Kealah Parkinson, and I am speaking with Stephen Dynako about Barbara Marx Hubbard, the author of Conscious Evolution, and really someone who brought that phrase and that concept to the forefront of American consciousness. And she did impact things globally as well. Can you speak a little bit more about her global impact? And then we're going to move into how you're fulfilling her legacy here in Valparaiso.
Sure. Well, I'll start with national first.
Okay.
And some people know this, a lot of people may not. She was on the Democratic slate for vice president in 1984. And a lot of people remember Geraldine Ferraro, that she was the first woman candidate for vice president. Well, actually, it was Barbara Marx Hubbard who had all the delegates. So Barbara and her team consciously put out there that Barbara was going to be on the ticket. And they did a kind of metaphysical process of visualizing this happen and then going out and getting the delegates. So she had something like just over 200 delegates, and she gave a speech, and you could find that on YouTube. 1984 speech to the Democratic National Convention, and if you listen to it, I mean, it's so relevant for today. I mean, it's just it's timeless. It really is. And she talks about conscious evolution. Now, in 1984, it was a bit trippy. If you take yourself back into that time, but it was relevant then, and it's absolutely relevant now if you listen to it. So basically she gives the speech, and then she gave her delegates to Geraldine Ferraro, and the rest of that is history. Well, in the wake of that, Barbara ended up doing work in the Soviet Union at the time to help bring together Americans and Soviets to evolve the world and to get off of this Cold War crazy train of mutually assured destruction. So, I mean, again, this ties back to her meeting with President Eisenhower all those years ago. And so that was that. So, and she did travel the world. She was involved in initiatives like this. Even more recently, back in, I think it was 2014, 2015, she did what was called a synergistic convergence, which was a process of bringing people together. And I'm going to just abbreviate this, but basically it was bringing people together from different sectors of society and really asking three questions. Like, one is what is your gift? What are you bringing? Your talent, your genius. What can you freely offer, and then where do you need help? And she did a number of these synergistic convergence events, are called SynCons, back in the 70s and 80s, and then she did one in Monterrey, Mexico, I think it was like in 2014, 2015. So she was always involved in just bringing people together and really diving deep into consciously evolving. And it started at the community level, at the nation level, the world level. Yeah. I'm
like lost in my head right now with all the vision.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It is
what
amazing.
She's I mean,
and when you study like organizational dynamics, right? You have to have some vision. You have to have some pragmatism, right? Individuals very rarely have a blend of both, right? And luckily, Barbara was wise enough to have a team of people to help her put the pragmatics into action because she was so vision. Yeah. It's so amazing. I lose track because I get lost in going into how vast that vision must be for her to. I really am drawn to it personally. Yeah. Obviously, you are as well. So talk a little bit now about the legacy and what you're doing here in Valpo.
Yeah, well, and this important point, though, is that I just want to bring up about being the visionary, because Barbara would be the first to tell you that she wasn't an organizer.
Right.
I mean, she had to have people around her who were good at those things. And this is where, again, this is the principle of co-creation, which is within the realm of conscious evolution, is that there are no solopreneurs. that we are all in this together, and we actually need one another's genius, that we're exponentially more powerful together.
And that's why we all live in tribes. I mean, think about it. I mean, when we look at primitive peoples, still there's the tribe component. We look at even people today. I mean, I think about my own family. We're all over the country, and we stay connected now through technology. On these constant text chains and things, and we'll, my one sister will say, "It's what's on your plate Wednesday," and she'll text us a picture of her dinner, and we all start, we're doing these things still. We're celebrating holidays around the same time. We're doing a lot of the traditions we grew up with. We are, making the same things for our meals, and we're sharing information with each other. We're still a tribe far away. And the way that we survive as a tribe still is that we are connected to this vision of what it means to contribute to humanity in some way, right? And so, whether that is something that we do in place, in time, or whether it's something we do dispersed and connected in different ways, it is what we do. We do co-create, right?
Yeah, we do. And this is the thing. This is the thing that Barbara always wanted us to remember, that we are actually created. We're literally coded to co-create. And it's only an illusion that we're somehow separate. Or that we must be separate in order to protect ourselves, which is another form of tribalism, right? It's like we cloister ourselves away because we're afraid of
anything outside of, right? The xenophobia.
Yeah. So co-creation, but it's the way nature works. I mean, if you look at just all of the ecosystems on Earth, right, or the Earth
everything's symbiotic, exactly.
The Earth as an ecosystem, it's all co-creative. There's nothing that exists completely on its own, devoid of any other connection. So this is what Barbara. This is one of the final frontiers now in humanity, because we're definitely at a point where it's essential for us to come together to transcend the current crises that we're in. Whether they're, we want to talk about climate change, the crazy divisive politics we're in, the tyranny of corporations, all of those things, right? So I mean, these are all crises that Barbara was encouraging us, like, if we must come together so that whatever comes together converges, and whatever converges rises. So as co-creators, using our powers for good,
right,
we can transcend all of these crises, and the crises are necessary as well. Like, we wouldn't be having these crises if it wasn't demanding the evolutionary impulse within each of us to contribute to transcending all of these issues.
And you talked about in your personal story where it got painful for you. Even your metaphor of I'm on these two different worlds here, and they're pulling apart, and I'm doing the splits, right?
Right.
And that becomes painful, and I have to make a decision, right, to jump, right? And so there's a physical pain. We can, even just picturing that, I can relate to a physical pain of doing the splits, being forced into the splits, right? And that's a real challenge. So that's a crisis point that serves a purpose. And I think it's really important to note that all crisis points can serve a purpose, right? And so,
absolutely.
You mentioned anything that comes together rises, right? That's that convergence. So when negative thinking and negative thinking comes together, that rises. It can be war, it can be conflict, it can be just like arguing with your kid's teacher at school, right? It can be having a fight with your spouse, or with a coworker. It can be any of these things, and it's a tipping point.
Exactly. It works both ways, right? So, this is the challenge too, because coming together using our powers for good is accelerating, as well as there are people coming together to appear to be doing a lot of harm in the world. And those things are accelerating at an increasing rate, and the question is, well, which one of those is going to accelerate faster? So
when we bring consciousness to, I do believe, and this is, I don't know where this is going to go on the show, but I'm going to say out loud that I do believe there are some people who consciously bring negativity to the forefront in an effort for their own goals, that there is a consciousness that's there. I think especially on the world stage, that's something with power, that some people automatically think power has a negative association to it. And if I want power, then I have to accept the negative aspect of it too. And then we'll use that to further the power successfully. I do see that happening. And so how does consciousness, when we come to a crisis point, whether someone is conscious of the negative or not, how does consciousness shift us and change the crisis point as a catalyst for positivity? Yeah,
great question. And I look at it, and Barbara looked at it from the perspective of is your desire power over, or is it power with?
Power over or power with?
Right?
That's great.
So, and there are people, and we can call, it's a strategy. Power over, it's a strategy. It works for a lot of people. Now, I would say that takes you so far, right? Because if you're always operating in a power over dynamic, you might appear to be working with others, but ultimately that's a house divided against itself.
True.
Right? Because if you and I are in a company together, let's say, and we're co-CEOs, and I'm all about power over, and you're all about power over, at some point we're going to lock horns.
Right. And only one can be on top. That's a phrase,
That's
right? In corporate America and politics.
That's right. I mean, and it's I don't think it's any surprise that in certain arenas, let's say, that there are a lot of people getting fired every week because they want to have power over. And as once the person who's at the top of the heap feels threatened, then he or she is going to do whatever he or she can to eliminate the competition. Now, in a power with dynamic, I'm interested in your contribution as much as you're interested in mine. And we realize that by joining genius, so this is another one of Barbara's terms, that by joining genius, that rising will occur. And I don't lose anything by offering you the opportunity to express your power, and you don't lose anything by offering me the opportunity to be powerful.
Yes. And, and since we're mentioning that world stage again, it's interesting to pay attention to where do even people who seem to do that, where are they smart enough to say, you know what, if we blend like world powers, if we acquiesce, if we make these connections, it actually furthers the cause. And we have to really, kind of find that balance to cooperate or to go to war. A lot of times that's what we're talking about here, right? And so, we can look at that and be really open to, because nobody's very few people are just all one way, right?
Right. Yeah, it's a spectrum.
Yeah, it is a spectrum.
We're on a spectrum, and the more we wake up, it's a process of waking up too. Because I having worked in the corporate world and having been a manager myself, I was in tune with the quote unquote power I had, and I was also in tune with the ability I had to actually encourage others to step up if I recognized the power in them, right? So so our own process of waking up, it takes us along the spectrum to something that's very selfish, to something that's very selfless. And the paradox is that we can feel all the more powerful in that selflessness state, in my experience.
It's very interesting. I'm going to have to do some grounding exercises myself because this stuff is literally dizzy making to me. We get to do these ideas and they're very elevated ideas, and my brain feels very elevated from thinking at this higher level, right? And so I literally have to ground myself. So I just want to encourage listeners, if we're getting a little out there and it's getting dizzy making for you, don't forget, especially if you're driving, to ground yourself. Imagine those tree roots growing out of your feet, right? And then also bringing it back again to day-to-day life. When we are, especially as parents, trying to find our tribes, that's a big thing right now in the parenting world, trying to find people who, because of all the shaming and the blaming and the social media shaming and this is the right camp and that's the right camp and that's the wrong camp. And there are so many parenting philosophies nowadays, right? Parenting has always been a relentless job because it's 24/7 and no one pays you and few people thank you. And so, that's an issue. And then nowadays too, so much of it is legalized. I just was doing some research for an article I happened to be writing locally, that it draws from some of the data that's out there on the quote relentlessness of parenting. And there was this one quote from a grandmother who was saying, when I was a mom in the 50s, we didn't helicopter parent in this way. We didn't hover in this way. We parked the stroller in front of the restaurant and went inside and had dinner and watched the baby through the window. Well, guess who goes to jail if they do that today? It's not a choice parents get to make, right? And so helicopter parenting is something that's been foisted upon a lot of young parents. So, and then there's this concept of how do I find my tribe of people who believe what I believe, if it's different from what I've grown up with, and who are not going to shame me for the beliefs that, right? So a lot of parents, I think, are really seekers today in a way that we've seen people be seekers of religion, where they're trying to find their tribes, right? So I, to me, this is kind of a little bit of a soapbox, right? Because this is my world right now, and it's painful.
Well, and Barbara went through the same. I mean, she had 5 kids.
So tell me about that, because I did see, there's a great documentary, and it's the 2012 documentary, I believe.
American Visionary.
American Visionary is what it's called. It's a great documentary. It's on, I believe, Prime Video right now, and it may be accessible through Netflix as well, but it's definitely something people can find online. American Visionary, and it talks a lot about Barbara's life, and it talks about her 2012 event, which was just before you met her. Then it sounds like
it would have been several years before I met her, but yeah.
And so she was leading up to this concept of bringing this conscious evolution into
because 2012 was viewed as being like a seminal event in the world, right? Because the whole Mayan calendar said we were the end of the world and all of this. But Barbara used 2012 as in essence a birthing of the new humanity, right? So
because again, she sees crisis as
crisis as a birth, exactly. Yeah,
excuse me.
Yeah. So, but going back to your comment about parenting, this is Barbara struggled with this because she sort of played the game or played into the game that, you're a young woman, you meet a guy, you get married, you're going to have a whole bunch of, as many kids as possible.
Yeah.
And
5 is a lot.
Yeah.
I think 5 is a lot. I've got friends who have 5, and I think it's amazing.
Yeah. And she continued to struggle with her higher purpose work while she was raising her family.
And she mentions this in the documentary, which is why I bring that up.
Yeah, exactly. And she loves being a mother. I'm going to use her in present tense to speak about her in this sense. And
excuse me.
And the challenge, I think, because you're speaking to it right now, the same was for Barbara, is how do I do all of what's expected of me, find my tribe, and contribute not only to my family but to the world in general, to self-actualize. And and Barbara just continued to quest. And I think, so like we may not have an answer to that question. Yeah. However,
I'm so sorry.
The questing, I think, is important because we're encoded to be curious, and the more we're curious and the more we ask, whomever you're asking, the higher power, God, spirit, whatever you want to call it, keep asking. And this is another tenet of spirituality in all its different manifestations over the years: is if you ask and it will be given. So if you don't have the answers now, it might be a little frustrating. Keep asking, and Barbara certainly did all her life, again, to the very end.
And I think a lot of people would say that motherhood or parenting is one of the highest callings that there is, right? You have the opportunity to impact other life.
Right.
You are literally doing this amazing service work every day of caring for life. You get the opportunity as a mother to grow life, right? A lot of mothers. And so that's wonderful. And I 100% agree with that. And then we live in this world where that's not really honored or recognized at the level, right? And I think, to me, that's the crux of the problem. Yeah. I mean, so just, again, to get on a soapbox, that's really an issue, right? If we're living in this world where it's seen as something where it's relentless, where there's no thank you, where there's no acknowledgement socially for the value that it has, and where you're either expected to do that with no recognition, which was Barbara's day, or to do that and also go out in the world and get your recognition outside, which is our day, a lot of times, unfortunately, then I admire these parents who are out there who can bring that spirituality to their day-to-day lives with their kiddos, put all the rest of that world stuff in a box, right? That's amazing, and I'm trying to get there. Yeah. So are you working with parents in that way?
Well, I am not directly, but there are people within what's the Evolutionary Ambassadors, which was the group of people who were in Barbara's last program. Okay. There are people who work in that realm, right? So let me use that as a segue just to talk about the evolutionary impulse beyond family. because
that's valid too.
Right. So for Barbara, her kids grow up, they become adults, they go off on their own. It's
Then what?
it'll happen for you and your kids, and it happens. So, and Barbara was, and this is why my experience has been this movement of conscious evolution is actually is a powerfully feminine movement. And this isn't to say that there aren't men in it,
right?
But
Obviously,
it's connecting very powerfully to the feminine impulse, because Barbara was like, well, once my kids are grown and out of the house, well, I'm going to live another, 40 years or whatever happens to be. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean I do nothing? And for her, it was a shift. So for parents who are now empty nesters, if we want to call it that, now you're actually not. So I love the way she puts this, because Barbara said when we're younger, we join genes to create babies. Oh. And then now when we're older, we join genius to birth our higher self. And that's how she saw her own work and her own self evolving after her kids were grown. Is that she was now seeking to join genius with co-creative partners. And she says, and if you look at the movement and you see there are so many women who are 50 plus, 60 plus, 70 plus, very active and really fighting like Mother Bear to transform this world that we're in, to move beyond these destructive patterns to a world of flourishing and nurturing, and it's kind of a new motherhood.
It is.
Or a renewed motherhood. I think the indigenous understood this, but now, we are at a crisis.
I mean, they had the crone, the concept of the crone.
Yeah.
First of all, I just want to say to the listeners, I'm really sorry. We don't have a cough button at this studio. And it's something I've always wanted, because I clearly need it on a regular basis. I do suffer from Northwest Indiana allergies, and I get them, especially during season changes. So, yes, let me just try as hard as I can not to keep coughing in your ears. I also want to say thank you for listening to Tune In, Radio for Your Mind, Body, and Soul. I am the coughing Kealah Parkinson, your host, and we are talking with Stephen Dynako. This is WVLP Low Power Radio in Valparaiso, Indiana, and we broadcast live around the world at WVLP.org. We're talking about Barbara Marx Hubbard. We're talking about Stephen Dynako's connection with her personally, and also as he continues to help her legacy thrive for a conscious evolution of humanity here in Valparaiso and across the United States. So you've been giving us some examples. We've been talking about parenting, how we can bring conscious evolution into our work as parents and also our work beyond the home. And I would like to hear, I think this is a good time to hear an example, if you can give us like an example of someone you have worked with or are working with.
Sure. That's a really easy one. Okay. So one of the evolutionary ambassadors is Sharon Maloney, who's in Australia.
Okay.
So not just the United States, but in the world, around the world. So Sharon has done this wonderful work around activating female power, and very in tune with Barbara's principles. She has a book called "Activate Your Female Power," and I'm actually working with Sharon right now on developing an online course based on the book. And the higher purpose of the female on Earth is one aspect of the evolutionary feminine is one aspect of Sharon's book and of the online course we're developing. And Sharon also talks about how the female is encoded actually to be co-creative. It's not about man versus woman.
Right.
It's about man and woman.
Exactly.
Woman and man. And she also gets into some other what people will consider radical concepts, like actually the birth is supposed to be an orgasmic experience.
Interesting.
And not a painful one. Which can be a tough one to kind of get your head around.
Although, I've seen videos of it happening. I did a lot of research on water births because I had my guys in the water, and I did not have that particular experience. But I was able to have 2 kiddos without any pain meds, and I'm very grateful for that experience, and it was amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
So grateful for that experience. And I understand why there's a lot of stuff left over for a lot of moms who go through births who don't get that experience. I had some of that stuff in my head too, and I had a great coach in my husband, right, being right there. And I have just recently heard of some stories of people who had these amazing, 20, 30-minute births. I have a friend who had 3 kiddos in I think a total of 6 hours.
Yeah.
Over the years.
And Sharon's work's very much about working with women in that. And in her and Sharon's experience was one of having experiencing like a really hard labor and a lot of trauma in that. And she's like, this can't be right.
Yeah, right.
So it led her on a path to discover how the female is actually truly encoded. And she goes through a lot of cultural anthropology as well to show how that the male and the female were revered as partners, particularly like in ancient Greece. And it's been the last 5,000 years where there's been this imbalance, and now we've got this kind of crazy patriarchy that we're all seeking to transmute.
We're seeking to dismantle it right now, right? Very much, again, it's happening very consciously. I think it is also happening reactively, right? Yeah. I think there were some great conscious contributors to the Me Too movement, and I think there were some very reactive contributors. We're seeing a lot of reactivity to it. And, I personally had this experience where, when I was seeing all this stuff come out in the paper, and I just was crying one day, just driving down the road with my husband, and I think our 2 kiddos were, younger and sleeping in their car seats, and I just was crying. We were talking about it, and he said, why are you crying about this? And I said, why couldn't this have happened when I was younger? Yeah. Where was that? And so it's powerful. It's amazing. And it's also kind of surreal to kind of be living through this experience now.
It is.
Even though we've been talking about it, some of us for 20 years, that the shift has been coming. I'm sure you've been talking about it for 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing because Barbara has gone through cycles of this. I mean, she was born in, 1929, right? Mm-hmm. I'll put a message out there to men that like as a man, this doesn't diminish me at all. I actually feel a lot more powerful being in partnership with very powerful women, and it doesn't threaten me. And I would say I would encourage any man who feels threatened by the rise of the feminine, it's like the evolutionary impulse for us is actually to partner. Mm-hmm.
Partner and protect.
And once you're
partner and protect.
And once you're received as a benevolent masculine presence, you will feel much more powerful as that than as like some macho guy who's just trying to assert chest thump. And I want to say, I see my heart goes out to the macho guy, which I think is hard for a lot of people to understand. But I have a few female friends where I feel like we're very kind of connected to this whole movement on a grassroots kind of spiritual, energetic level. Yeah. And all of us really have a lot of compassion and sympathy and even empathy for that guy because he was emasculated very young and given a lot of mixed messaging, and his feminine was squelched, right? His feminine side, his ability to express feelings. And I think, a male who's been through that ringer and, been kind of extruded, his emotions have been extruded only through the lens of anger, to mix some metaphors. And, he only gets this opportunity to express that. And then that gets taken away. What's left, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of this implosion that's happening. And that, I think, is a travesty because that's where we're seeing that patriarchy has affected everybody. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right.
So now we're really, really on this whole different tangent.
Yeah.
So I hope listeners are keeping up, and I want to thank you again. We still have a few more minutes left, but I just want to say, is there anything else you want to share with us about Barbara or about your work, Stephen?
Sure. So one of the things that I got inspired to do after the Evolutionary Ambassador Academy ended was to create basically a platform, an online educational platform called the Social Chrysalis.
Ooh.
And you can, if you go to my website, which is Dynako.com, it's a lot easier to spell that, Dynako.com. I have a link to the Social Chrysalis. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm working with the ambassadors, and I'm working with other evolutionaries, other followers of Barbara, or people who are in alignment with the principles of conscious evolution, and basically offering them a platform to take whatever their genius is If they have something to teach, if they have something if they want to share their wisdom and they don't have really the technical ability, or they're not sure where to start, I'm offering the platform as a way to co-create courses with people. So that's been the big the big inspiration that I've had in the wake of the end of this program, because I continue to support the ambassador community, and we have our own weekly meetings. That's less public, but in a very public way, this social chrysalis is a way to take the work of conscious evolution and continue to have it ripple out by bringing people in, recognizing their genius, and offering a platform to teach the world, quite literally.
So what are some things with your vision? What do you think we're moving into? When you're seeing these people who are bringing their genius, what are some ways you're seeing the world change consciously based on what they're contributing? And what are some things that you hope we're going to get to?
Where I see it changing is I think I think and I feel that people are really becoming much more strongly attuned to the truth that we're all in this together and we must work together. And there's such a greater trending to that now. Again, like I think it's going to make the word solopreneur obsolete, because no one is truly a solopreneur. Even if you think you are, you're dependent on and you're interdependent on others to do what you do. So this this co-creation, joining of genius is what I see continuing to emerge. And then what I hope for is the acceleration of that. You know, I mean, there's particularly like the climate crisis, right? If we believe the science, and we're hearing that we have like a dozen years left, and we must do something extremely proactive to transform the way that we fuel our world and so forth. It requires an acceleration, not only of our consciousness but of our action. That's my hope and my own yearning and impulses to continue to be active and to accelerate that action and to support others in it as well. So it's not all about me, and it's not just all about Barbara. You know, it's Barbara was always about it's us joining genius. So we are all in it together, and we need to be in it together in order to affect these transformations.
Barbara Marx Hubbard has been called an American futurist, and even though her work technically now is in the past, and she did pass away this April, it is so relevant, it is so timely, it is so amazing, it is so inspirational. And her work of conscious evolution and conscious co-creation is something that Mr. Stephen Dynako is helping to bring here to Valparaiso and beyond. And I want to thank you for your work with that. This is really, really amazing. And I just want to ask you one more time if there is anything else that you would like to share as part of your outgoing message to our listeners here at WVLP.
Oh, thank you. Look for your co-creators, right? If you feel, and it's easy to feel alone doing this work. I mean, conscious evolutionaries, and Barbara struggled with this too, believe it or not. That's sometimes she felt like she was alone in doing the work.
They did mention that, in her in the documentary that I did watch, American Visionary, her sisters were interviewed. One of her sisters was interviewed and was talking about, how she's gone through these, as you mentioned, these existential depressions, existential crises, when her work wasn't moving fast enough.
Right.
Keeping up with her vision.
Yeah. So look, like you said, look for your tribes. So if you're really yearning to do more purposeful work and you're finding it difficult wherever, your community or wherever, just keep seeking. It's my encouragement to you. Keep seeking.
Don't give up. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
The show is about mindfulness, and so today our subject has gotten very visionary, which is amazing. So if we can bring it back, Stephen, just a little bit to the mindful component, what is something people can do to access their vision, especially very pragmatic people? What are some things they can do to access their vision, bring conscious evolution into their day-to-day lives with mindfulness?
Well, I'll tell you. So you mentioned conscious evolution, the book. Barbara has another book called Emergence, which she actually walks people through a process of doing exactly that.
Love it.
And a lot of that has to do with Barbara journaled for decades. I think she started when she was 18, and she literally had 150 plus
that's right.
journals.
She kept them, which is amazing.
Yeah, and and the way she journaled is that she would spend a few hours. Now, not everybody's going to have the luxury of a few hours every morning, but spent quality time every morning getting in touch with her higher self, and then whatever was coming through from her higher self, she wrote down, and just.
Downloads.
Very cool. They call it, and there's so much.
So pay attention to that, right?
Yeah,
you can pay
attention
to those things. Paying attention to that is great. And I see the subtitle for that says, "From ego." What is it called?
The shift from ego to essence.
Shift from ego to essence. Yeah. Love it. So merging of the self, emergence. That's a great title for that. So
and listen deeply to your inner self, your higher self, because it's there, and it will speak to you.
And you get all kinds of messages.
Yeah.
I want to thank Stephen Dynako for being our guest on Tune In today. This has been such a pleasure talking to you and talking to listeners. And we'll see you next week in 2 weeks on October 17th, Thursday at 10 a.m. See you later, meditators.